what happened if he does like, I make that kind of face? Oh, gross. You know, it's like, it is irritating. Or when you're calling somebody and it echoes. There's some phones that will always do that. Hello, hello, hello. It's like, I'm just going to stop talking. But
I don't want to listen to myself.
No. Okay. Well, there's 31 verses in this Psalm 109. It's a long psalm. So we'll read through it all and hit on certain themes throughout this psalm. This is what's categorized as an imprecatory psalm, which means it's a psalm of cursing. It's a psalm of David expressing, asking God to judge somebody is basically what it is in summary. And that is a hard concept for us to understand. I don't know if we would want to gather around the table here and pray imprecatory prayer on a certain person or a certain, that would seem very wrong to us, and I don't think we're called to do that as New Testament Christians. David's scenario is very different. He was a God-appointed king of God's special nation, and so David had prophecies. He had things that God had promised to David that we don't have. And so there's things that David can say and things he can ask God to do that God's already promised he would do for David. And as New Testament Christians, I don't have the God-given right to say, this is the land that God's given me, and I'm going to be the king on this land, and my family will be for generations and generations. Land for me has no bearing. Those kind of political, specifically in regard to a nation, isn't necessarily directly connected to my relationship with God. For David, this was. And so we don't know the object or the person that David's attacking in this. Some people think it may be Saul. David and Saul, of course, had a lot of, Saul was chasing David many, many times for long periods of time. Close calls where David could have been killed. Close calls when Saul could have been killed. But God was involved in all that. There was David's son Absalom was very much in pursuit of David at one point and tried to kill him. There was another son a little later on that basically David had to leave his house, and he ran out on foot, and he was basically in exile of his own country for a while as his own sons tried to overthrow him and destroy his kingdom. And so we don't necessarily know if David's specifically picking on, again, sons or to Saul, but David had a lot of enemies. There was a lot of times there was political unrest and coups that tried to overthrow his power. So we don't necessarily know the person or the object that he's going after. But this is a pretty intense, this is probably, in the studying I was doing, this is probably the most intense imprecatory psalm of all of them. There's other ones we've seen already, but this is pretty intense. And so later on in verses 6 through 20, we'll read that in a little bit. He asks judgment on this man, and he doesn't just go to this man, he goes into his family and says, even long-term, help this man's even prosperity to end. Basically, generation-wise, destroy this man. Make him not even have great-great-grandchildren. Totally wipe this name off the face of the earth. It's pretty intense. And so we'll kind of work through this together. So the first point, verses 1 through 5, and some of this will be redo for some of you if you listen to it. But the first 5 verses I wrote down as David's plight. This is David stating his cause to the Lord. First 5 verses, it says, Hold not thy peace, O God. I'll start over. Hold not thy peace, O God of my praise, for the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are opened up against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They compass me about also with words of hatred, and fought against me without a cause. For my love they are my adversaries, but I give myself unto prayer, and they have rewarded me evil for good, and hatred for my love. Now, I mentioned this a little earlier in Psalm 108, 2 weeks ago, I guess. This phrase right away, hold not thy peace, O God of my praise. And O God of my praise seems like a very generic, and I shouldn't say generic, it's a phrase that David uses a lot when he wants to glorify God, when he wants to express a worshipful attitude to God. A thought came into my mind as I was trying to process this, as I glorify God, what's the meaning behind that action? Am I just declaring to God that I love him? Am I just doing my job in worshiping him? Or am I doing something even more profound than that? And I referenced that here in the notes that we acknowledge how great he is because we need him to be what he claims to be. And I was thinking about that in lots of areas, whether it's a person, whether it's faith we have in a company, whether it's faith we have in a nation or a political party or a leader or our own family members, we express positive thinking about them. We're not going to dwell on their negative sides. We're not going to dwell on, well, they have failed in this area, or a proud grandmother expresses her love for a grandchild, and she doesn't bring up the bad points. She brings up the good things. She brings up the high points, or a parent to a child, whatever the case is. And I think that's the same kind of attitude we have, and God doesn't have the bad side. But as I express my appreciation to God, I'm giving these positive traits because that's the God I want to serve. I'm expressing what I know about him because I want him to stay that way. Not that somehow my words are going to change the way he thinks or the way he's going to act, or that I have some bearing on God's character, but it expresses to the rest of you as a church family and to the outside world what I really think about God. And so I'm telling the world what I think about him as I glorify him. So I'm not just worshiping him for the sake of worshiping him. I'm acknowledging how great he is because I need him to be that great. And David, we'll see a little later, really needs God to be a great God in this particular scenario when he is in the midst of such very pointed persecution. Okay, the first phrase, "Hold not thy peace," I kind of think of the idea of don't hold back, let it all go. Just to tear into these guys, kind of thing. Don't put, get the pressure medium wise. Just go full bore after these guys. They're evil. They have not held back at all against me. You kind of see that when, I don't know, as a child, or you see your own children, they get angry with each other, and you can kind of tell how angry they are. Oh, they're a little irritated, and you see a flash in their eyes, and you're like, oh boy, now they've gotten really angry. Now they're not holding anything back. They're really going to hurt, or they're really excited, or whatever the case. You can see that in people's faces, in their character. And the same expressions to God: don't hold back anything. Just get angry. You do this, God. I need you to be here for me. The mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are opened against me. So we see that, we'll see a little later, this connection to these wicked and deceitful people are using their mouths for evil things. I wrote down here in the notes that they use speech for oppression and lies. Using their speech specifically for that purpose, to oppress David. And I think of, there's other passages here speak of physical violence they might be trying to attack David with, maybe trying to actually hurt him or even kill him. But here you have words are doing some terrible damage to oppressing. And I've never been in severe oppression, but to have people that you have to interact with on a regular basis that don't like you, and they've expressed ways and they've expressed feelings of disgust towards you, or they tear down, or you can just see their facial expressions when you're trying to share something, and it really does get to you. It kind of irritates, and you can kind of start second-guessing yourself, and you're thinking so far, you think so much about them that you can't even do what you're called to do, and it really gets to you. And so, and if you think of David, for evil or wicked and deceitful people doing that to David, that's got to be miserable. To speak with a lying tongue, to deceive, to try to oppress with the speech. In verse 3, they compassed me about also with words of hatred and fought against me. That speaks almost of violence, physical violence. I wrote down outnumbering and stress through hate speech and violence. They've encompassed David around. And this is just an interesting connection. At the end of this psalm, we'll see David using the exact same terminology about how he's using his mouth and what he's doing with encompassing his enemies. He has a different motive. He has a different thing he's going to do with them, just as something to look for, as just kind of interesting contrast. The wicked people here, though, are surrounding him, and they're there to, they want to again break down that any kind of mental barrier, any kind of mental strength he has left. I remember one time, and this wasn't even oppression, it was just the physical feeling of having people close to me. I wouldn't even say I'm very claustrophobic, but I was in an elevator and it was empty, and 4 guys came walking in, big guys. They were at least a foot taller than me, and they were big. I mean, they were at least 250, 300 pounds, and they surrounded me, and they weren't there to hurt me. It was just but I felt like, oh no, like I'm gonna get, and you all of a sudden feel this, and to be surrounded, whether it's even physically surrounded, or just know that there's no way out. I have no friends in this room. I can walk in here and no one likes me. No one has my back. No one's here to support me. That gets to you mentally. And so being compassed about and fought against, words of hatred are used. And then verses 4 through 5, we see attacking one that has done good. David has tried to express kindness. He's tried to express love. And I think if we're attributing this to Saul, if we're attributing this imprecatory psalm pointed towards Saul, think how much David did for Saul. He played for him on a harp. He helped when Saul had that evil spirit come upon him and the Holy Spirit left him and an evil spirit came upon him and he couldn't sleep. He was frustrated and he was irritated and David came in and played his harp for him. He calmed him, and just the words of you think of David in contrast to Saul. Saul's in rebellion to God, hates what God's trying to do. In fact, ripped off the hem of Samuel's garment and said, basically it turned out to be his own illustration of how God was going to rip the kingdom from Saul's hand. And then you have faithful David, however old he was, late teens or whatever it was, a faithful young boy who had killed lions and bears with God's strength and was now just faithfully expressing what God had inspired him to write. That's going to comfort somebody. If Saul's willing to open up his heart and listen, you can actually fall asleep to something like that, saying, I can rest in knowing who God is. And David was doing that. And so he was giving of his heart. He was giving of inspired words as he played before Saul. When he killed Goliath, he expressed, I am here as a subject of Saul. I'm here for God. I'm a representation of God. But he didn't fail to mention Saul's the king. I'm not trying to be anyone fancy here. I'm just obeying God because Saul's my king. Saul says we got to kill this guy. I'm obeying God by obeying Saul. And so David never wavered from trying to he had that popularity where David's killed his tens of thousands. Saul's only killed his thousands, but wow, David, he never took that and said, well, I should become the next king. I need to usurp Saul's authority. No. And so you see all this good that David's tried to do. If we're trying to make this, I think we could put Saul in this position. And yet Saul turned around and tried to kill him, tried to pin him to the wall twice, took his wife from him, even though David had as a reward received Michal as Saul's daughter as his wife. Saul took Michal from him, had him try to killed and hunted down like a dog several times, and David did many great military feats and a lot of amazing acts by God's power to bless Saul and his kingdom. And David says, I'm rewarded evil for the good I'm trying to do. And so that's David's plight. We see that as David's current condition. That's the position he's at as he's crying out to God. Then verses 6 through 20, and I'll read those here. This is, in my Bible, it's outlined as punish of the wicked. I'm really beginning on in my outline here as a requested judgment. This is what David's asking God to do to Saul, let's say. And it gets intense. I'm thinking just as a dad, going, would I want somebody to pray this against my family? It's pretty tough. It's pretty hard thinking about long term and the generational impact. It says, set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand. When he shall be judged, let him be condemned, and let his prayer become sin. Let his days be few, and let another take his office. Let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. Let his children be continually vagabonds and beg. Let them seek their bread also out of their desolate places. Let the extortioner catch all that he hath, and let the stranger spoil his labor. Let there be none to extend mercy unto him, neither let there be any to favor his fatherless children. Let his posterity be cut off, and in the generation following let their name be blotted out. Let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered with the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth, because that he remembered not to show mercy, but persecuted the poor and needy man, that he might even slay the broken in heart. As he loved cursing, so let it come unto him. As he delighted not in blessing, so let it be far from him. As he clothed himself with cursing, like as with his garments, so let it come into his bowels like water, and like oil into his bones. Let it be unto him as the garment which covereth him, and for a girdle wherewith he is girded continually. Let this be the reward of my adversaries from the Lord, and of them that speak evil against my soul. Verses 6 through 7, David prays that this man would be afflicted with authority over him that has the motivation and the drive, basically from the heart of Satan himself. Have a wicked man put over him, and let Satan stand at that. Basically, what I'm reading, and I see it as grammatically, is let Satan stand by this leader's right hand. This wicked man that has this leader put over him, Satan's the one whispering into the ear of this now wicked leader over let's say Saul. Okay, Saul had never had his authority usurped, but he was under the oppression of the Philistines, and there was a lot of at the very end, he died knowing that his army had lost the battle. And so we don't understand, whether all these things actually come true or not. It's hard to say. This is coming from David's heart, but to be oppressed in that kind of way by authority, that's I think of even just we just mentioned in prayer about last year. I mean, this is the last 2021, and would it be a year that we'd want to even wish on our worst enemies? Of just that kind of oppression, to have leaders that don't seem to be following after God. That's really frustrating when you're trying to even have some resemblance of I'm trying to do the right thing, and you have people in charge of you that don't care. And in fact, they might make it illegal of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to promote. And so to have a wicked leader over you is very, very afflicting. In verse 7, when he shall be judged, let him be condemned. So just by unfair laws, by the unfair authority that is put over him, there's no way out for this man. He even though he might be trying to do things the right way or somehow trying to step back and say, I have been wrong. There's the authority is just going to come down and just keep pounding upon him. Let him just be condemned. When he's trying to pray, let it become a sin. So even spiritually, he can't even cry out to God and say, my authority, I'm surrounded by this wicked authority, but God can at least reach out to you. Don't let that even happen. Is that even right? Can David even express that to God? Again, this is coming from David's heart, and this is real. And God allowed this to be inspired, and allowed this to be in our Bibles today. Even say, don't even let this man be able to reach out to God. As he even prays, let that even come back as just more sin upon him. He can't even see God as a friend through oppression. Even though how wicked he was, let's say Saul, even how wicked Saul was, should he be able to at least even turn to God in his most darkest moments as he's being judged by God? Can he at least even turn to God and say, can you please help me? Can you please give me some glimmer of hope that I'll get through this? And David says, let that not even happen. Let him be so cut off from any kind of help from you, even as he's being oppressed by these authorities. Then we see in verse 8, let his days be few. Let's talk about the end of his life. That's a very kind and polished way of saying that. But he's talking about his death. He's talking about him having a short life. Let him have his days be few. Let another take his office. And that did happen to Saul. His family did not take over the authority of king. The royalty line was taken away from that. Saul and 3 of his sons died in that battle, the same battle that Saul died in. Jonathan died, and 2 more sons. And so there was no line left of Saul to say that's going to be the next king. And in fact, if we look more into 1st Kings, 1st Chronicles, early parts where we see right after Saul is killed, his whole family, his extended family, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, they take off running and hiding in the fields going, our great-granddad's dead. King Saul's dead. Everyone's going to be after our heads. Everyone wants to kill the family of Saul. Saul was so hated, and David was so favored that they said, and that's what happened with Mephibosheth later on, because he falls and breaks his ankles because we got to get out of here. You're the son of Jonathan. You're the direct line of Saul. You're going to be killed if someone finds out who you are. And so, and then that was never David's intention. He never wanted to do that. But that's you kind of can see the fulfillments of some of these judgments, even in that, is that Saul had nobody. There was no ability at all for him to have any kind of heritage as being the king. Let his children be fatherless. and his wife a widow. It's pretty, especially in those times, that was almost a death sentence for the wife. If she didn't have a family or a husband to lean on for income, and her children were fatherless, they didn't have, especially as young children, they didn't have a food source coming in, they didn't have ability to have any kind of sustenance or money to provide for a home. We see in interactions with Elijah, and he had an interaction with a widow and her son. It was like, we don't have anything. We have no food. We have just enough to make a few cakes, and then we're going to die. I mean, how horrible. And so there was no security, social security nets. There was no widow's benefits. It was if you didn't have a family structure, you were going to suffer very greatly or even die. And so this condemnation upon this man's family is almost a death wish on the children themselves. Let his children be continual vagabonds. That's an old word, but that word just means just worthless people. People that just wander, no sense of direction. They don't have jobs. They don't have a place to stay. They're just wandering around. Almost kind of an older term of like transients today. People just, for whatever reason, they just have no bearing. They have no grounding in wherever they might be. Let them seek bread in desolate places, in places where I think of like looking in dumpsters, looking places for food. You don't go to you can't afford going to a restaurant. You can't go to the grocery store anymore. Not even a homeless, a homeless shelter food line is there. You're digging through every kind of place just to find something to eat. Your dad used to be the king. Your dad used to have abilities and wealth, and you had prosperity, and now all that's taken away. All that's gone. Your mom can't even provide for you. What a horrific state. And then let the extortioner come in. The strangers come and spoil. Take all that's left. And I wasn't directly involved in this, but I just heard this kind of second hand. After my dad died, it was so sad that there was literally, it almost felt like vultures coming in, and they see a home that's been upset. They see a father has left, or in this case, a husband has died, and people just came in with, whether it was false claims or spam or some kind of scams, and just fell upon mom on the phone just with, hey, you should buy this, or you should pay for this, or did you know that your husband got involved in this and you need to pay out? And it was all lies. It was just trying to get money because this is a vulnerable time. It's somebody that she doesn't know. She, maybe things happened that she wasn't aware of, so she'll just willingly give us money. And it was sad. It was sad to see people. Their whole business was to target widows, to target people in vulnerable situations. Doesn't matter how old they are. Doesn't matter how young the kids are at home. That's a weak person that we can manipulate and use and twist up. And whether it was insurance people or bankers, or a lot of people just didn't have that sympathy, just to say, hey, you're going through a hard time, let me give you some advice, And so picture this man dying, his wife's a widow, his children are fatherless, and extortioners come in and say, hey, and that word extortioner has the idea of taking things, and unfortunately take it in the cloak of legality, of some kind of legal, I'll do it this way, and in their mind, they know they're playing a game, and they're taking as much as they can through confusing legal actions that no one can understand, and eventually it's all on their plate. They've taken everything you've had. For the stranger to come in and spoil. I think I mentioned that in the video, but for a stranger to come in and take your things. That was one thing that always upset, or I shouldn't say it upset me. It was odd because there was one time we had a family, and it was all done legally. It was all good. We weren't doing anything in a mean way. But this lady had passed away, and her house was just, her sons came in and said, we don't want any of this. You go in and take it. And you walk in and you go, I have no emotional connection to any of these things. You take a picture down. This is a picture of a beautiful event that happened that, maybe it's a memory, but the boys didn't want it, and she's not around to enjoy it anymore. And you take the picture out, you throw it away, and you feel like, I'm a stranger taking this lady's things. I'm taking her, and we were doing it with the right attitude. Obviously, no one else wanted it. But the picture, a guy's house, and people come in to reclaim or repo the home, and you take things out to sell in a bankruptcy auction or something, and spoilers, strangers, no one knows the long time it took you to buy this, or the special memory behind buying this item, or the wonderful time you had painting this room. No one cares. We were unloading stuff, trash out of the Dapron house, throwing away boxes and boxes of pictures going, this was someone's special memories, and I'm just tossing because they're nothing to me. They're nothing to me. And so, but the stranger, I just think of that too, of just how it's almost, for somebody to almost know what they're doing is almost better than a stranger coming in and having no care at all, no emotional connection at all to what this man has built up or raised, whether it's funding, whether it's money, whether it's possessions, whatever it is. Sad situation. So the curse on this guy is just over and over abundantly twofold as this man has lost his life, his family has lost their means, and anything that would ever come, whether it was investments, retirement, something that this man had tried to lay aside to help his family, is taken away and gone. The strangers have come in and stripped it clean. Let there be none to extend mercy unto him, neither let there be any to favor his fatherless children. And I wrote down here that they would lose favor in the public perception. The community wouldn't even care about him. That's pretty harsh for the community. It's been so encouraging to see how our local community blesses, however small or big the family might be, whatever means the family might have, there's a common collective community concern for, do you need something? Even if it's just a plate of food or a well provided meal for the family after a funeral or something like that. There's just some expression of, hey, we care about you. And if you need more, just call and ask, But in this cursing, don't even let that happen. Don't even let the community even show up for the meal. There will be no community food, there'll be no food for the family because no one cares. How awful would that be? Let his posterity be cut off. Speaking of, verse 14, speaking of that, even his family wouldn't even continue to grow. There would not be a second or third generation. His children would be so confused and they wouldn't even be able to establish families. Verse 14, let the iniquity of his father be remembered. Speaking of not just going into the future of his generational family being destroyed, but looking back and allow the curses almost say, God, remember the sins of the past. Saul's family wasn't perfect. Saul had parents that were sinners. We all do, okay? But to say, God, remember those father's sins and allow those heritage, that heritage of sin to continue to ripple down, to destroy even the last remaining great grandkids of this wicked man, that even the cursing from their great-great-grandfather would come back to bite them, that their mother, that her sins would not be blotted out. Let God remember these people in verse 15 long term, so the memory of them might be cut off from the earth. So we're talking about total desolation. We're talking completely wiping their memory clean from the earth. Not just don't let them have money anymore, don't let the dad have a job anymore, but just completely destroying them. It's horrible. Verse 16, because he remembered not. And this is verses 16 through 20. Kind of get down to the reasons behind this. Why, and there's probably many more, but why is David asking cursing on this man for this? And this is heavy stuff, but in verse 16 it's because he remembered not to show mercy. He persecuted the poor that he might even slay the brokenhearted. There's many more things, but this is what this guy did. His life was dedicated in this way. He remembered not to show mercy. If there was other circumstances where maybe somebody else's family was going to be in the same circumstance that his family is now in, when he was at a place where he could have shown mercy, he didn't. He didn't care. He persecuted the poor. They're already down. They're already beaten down. They're already on their backs, can't get up, and he continues to beat them up. He continues to pound them. He continues to exact taxes on them. He continues to steal from them. He continues to be the extortioner himself, if we could say that, to slay even the brokenhearted. And I was telling Ruth, it was kind of, there's a friend of ours on Facebook that is from Montana, and she's involved in just, unfortunately, the drug scene and addictions, and it's just, and her whole statuses on a regular basis is just expressing how down the dumps she is. I don't even have a place to sleep, and could someone even just give me an air mattress? Or I never haven't had a square meal in a month, and it's like, oh my God, it just kind of gets you down the dumps, and you think of, she would be, in my mind, she would be the definition of a broken heart. And then to come in and say, and I'm taking your car, the one thing you have, and I'm gonna take that. That's what this man would do. If it was King Saul, let's call it that. That's what he would do. He would take the one little bright hope this guy has left. I'm taking that too. I'm going to steal that one more thing. You have one thing going for it. I'm taking that. I'm breaking your broken heart. He loved cursing. Verse 17, he loved cursing, so let it come upon him. He loved to curse people so much, now God cursed him. Okay? He delighted not in blessing. Instead of blessing people, he cursed them. He didn't bless them. He never said, you know what? I'll give you an extension. I won't take that right away. Or here's some extra food. Or let me help you. No, he didn't want to do that, so no one's going to bless him now. He cursed all the time, so let cursing come upon him. He didn't want to bless, so let blessings don't come upon him. Make it be far from him, rather, in verse 17. And this speaks of, in more of an illustrative way, as he clothed himself, let cursing be like his garment. And it's a really interesting picture as we think about this, but we put clothes on every single day. What if in the same repetitive nature that we put clothes on, that cursing comes upon us just as often? I mean, that's every single day. That's pretty regular. As we put a cloak on, let cursing, in a sense, come on us just as regularly. And I think that's why God uses clothes to express the old man and the new man, the sin nature and the new man, our new life in Christ, is because it's that regular. We put something on every day, and we have to take off the old thing. Let that be the same thing we do in the morning when we take off the old man. Oh, sin nature, you're back. I'm taking you off. And so that expression is used here again. Let cursing be just as regular as the garments he's putting on. In verse 18, it uses the idea of so let it come with the cursing as bowels like water and oil into his bones. Speaking of, and from what I read here, it was the power of water and oil in the wrong places does a lot of damage to your body. If you have water in among the bowels and organs of your body, that's a real problem. You could die from that. There's diseases, infections that cause that, and oil is very penetrating. It can ooze into bones and cause more damage. So let the cursing just permeate into your not just physical body, but your mind and your emotions and your whole being. Okay, so it's really long-term cursing here. And we're going a little while here, but we'll wrap it up. In verse 20, let this be the reward of my adversaries from the Lord and of them that speak evil against me. Wrapping that all up, let this be the reward. Let this be the gift that he has earned. Okay? And then in the last few verses here, 21 through 31, we'll read that. But do thou for me, O God, the Lord, for thy name's sake, because thy mercy is good, deliver thou me. For I am poor and needy, and my heart is wounded within me. I am gone like the shadow when it declineth. I am tossed up and down as the locust. My knees are weak through fasting, and my flesh faileth of fatness. I become also a reproach unto them. When they looked upon me, they shake their heads. Help me, O Lord my God, I say, O save me according to thy mercy, that they may know that this is thy hand, that thou, Lord, hast done it. Let them curse, but bless thou. When they arise, let them be ashamed, but let thy servant rejoice. Let my adversaries be clothed with shame, and let them cover themselves with their own confusion as with a mantle. I will greatly praise the Lord with my mouth. Yea, I will praise him among the multitude. For he shall stand at the right hand of the poor, to save him from those that condemn his soul. And so we'll just hit on a few verses for time's sake, but we see David originally here expressing, and I'll get those verses here, verses 21 through 25. David is sharing, I wrote down here, the physical reaction to attack speech and violence. This is earlier, the first 5 verses, he expressed what the evil people were doing to him. Now in these first 21 through 25, he says, now this is how I'm physically doing. My knees are failing. I've lost weight. And these are all physical, we've all experienced these ourselves. Maybe we've known someone that has. When you're stressed out, you get overwhelmed, you can lose weight, or you'll overeat, or I know people that their hair turns white, their bodies are suffering from the stress. David says, this is where I'm at, Lord. Verse 26, help me, O Lord my God, O save me according to thy mercies. Verse 27, I think, is really neat. That they, And this could be anyone. We could say this is the wicked people, this is the deceitful people, this is even the people that are neutral, the people that don't even know really what's going on. Whoever's watching, that they may know that this is thy hand, that thou, Lord, hast done it. That should be, in a sense, that should be the end cap of any prayer we have. Whether it's God help us have a great VBS this year, or God help my family member through this difficult time, or whatever it might be. And God, at the very end, just make sure everyone knows it's your hand that did it. What a wonderful way to end it, with whether it's, again, good or bad, however we want to define it, whether it's asking God to sustain us, or bless, or thanking God for something good he did. God, just make sure people know it was you. Not just, that was a good fluke of nature, that happened just perfect for them. No, it was God that did it, okay? And then finally, the final verse I'll look at here, verse 30. I will greatly praise the Lord with my mouth. Yea, I will praise him among the multitude. I had mentioned there was a connection from the first 5 verses of this psalm. What were the wicked people doing with their mouth? They were deceiving. They were speaking evil. They were speaking with a lying tongue. What is David doing with his mouth? I will greatly praise the Lord with my mouth. So David's not even saying, I'm going to, we see David's humility to God, saying, God, you do these wicked things. You have the right to do it. I don't. I'm going to praise you. If you're going to do this to these wicked people and curse them in this manner, you go ahead and do it. I'm going to praise you. And then he says, I will praise you among the multitude. What were the wicked people doing with multitudes? They were using it to encompass David. They were using it as a bully tactic to surround him, get him claustrophobic, get him stressed out, get him afraid, get him maybe he's even going to die if they're lucky enough, And David says, no, I want a multitude around me so I can praise God. And I think it's a neat contrast there. David ends with verse 31, for he shall stand, speaking of God, speaking of the Lord specifically, he shall stand at the right hand of the poor and save him from those that condemn his soul. And again, we see the word poor, and that word is used a lot in this psalm. That's not just speaking of financial poverty or a lack of means. That's emotionally, that's spiritually drained. You have nothing left. I mean, you've relied on God for a long, long time, and nothing's looking up, and you're burned out. Your strength is gone. That can be poor too. And so David was in all cases in this particular event poor, and yet God was going to stand by his right hand. The Lord was there. Instead of Satan standing by your right hand, the Lord's there with him and going to bless him. So, any questions or other thoughts on that? It was a long passage, but a lot to dig into with that. Hopefully those notes are, so you can go back and chew on. I put on the bottom too, it's a difficult psalm for us to justify in our minds, but that psalm stayed around just as long as, well, it's still here with us just as much as John 3:16 is. And so I can't write it off and say that's not a healthy thing for us to read. God let it come there, and God let it be inspired, and right. I'm not going to say it in front of this thing, but yes, yeah, right. It would be that exact same thing. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.